Well, good morning, friendship. All right, that was okay. So, we're going to start with a little experiment this morning. So, we're going to need a little audience participation. So, I hope you had enough coffee here. So, first of all, I want you to raise your hands if you drove here this morning. So, if you drove, and I want you to keep your hands up. Look at all these hands. Look at how many people drove here today. So, now, I want you to keep your hands up if you drove the speed limit or under the entire way to church this morning. All right? Leave your hands up if you drove the speed limit. Now, look around, and we see a lot less hands. There's maybe 25% of the hands up. So, all right, the rest of you can put your hands down. So, for the other 75% of us, our tickets are waiting out in the foyer. So, this was a setup, sorry, but the police are onto us. But why do we do that? Why do we drive over the speed limit? You know it's against the law, right? But we want to do as much as we can before we're facing consequences. So for me, it's always been 9, you're fine, 10, you're mine. I don't know if you heard that before, but you drive 9 over or less, and you're probably going to be okay. But if you get to that 10 miles an hour over, you're going to get a ticket or get pulled over. Now in a school zone, I'll do a little bit less, not because there's kids around, but because the fines are doubled, right? So I don't want to pay double the fine if I get busted, so I'm going to drive a little bit less over the speed limit, right? But we don't do this just in driving. We do this in other areas of our life. I mean, we want to do just enough to where we don't face the consequences of our actions, right? We might do this at work. We might do this in our relationship. We might do this in our finances, to where we're doing just enough to where we don't experience pain, we don't experience consequences, or in some cases, we don't get arrested. And even in society, we tend to organize our lives around the lowest common denominators, right? How low can we actually go before there's problems that get involved? So we're asking ourselves a wrong question. The question we're asking ourselves is there anything wrong with what I'm doing? And maybe there's not something wrong with what you're doing, but if you ask yourself that question over and over and over and over again and keep making those decisions that maybe just aren't quite wrong, you're going to end up in a place where you never intended to be. And you're going to be asking yourself that question then, how the heck did I get here? Because you ended up in a place you never wanted to be. That's what our whole series has been about, asking better questions to see if we can make better decisions. So in week 1, we were asking ourselves if you're being honest with yourself, but being really honest with yourself. I mean, we could sell ourselves on almost anything. And if we were looking at that same decision for somebody else, it would be obviously not the right choice. But for ourselves, we could sell ourselves on it. So are we really taking a deep look inside of ourselves and saying, are we being honest? In week 2, we went in to talk about the story of our life and what story do we want it to tell. Our life is literally a story, decision after decision after decision. Those are the chapters of our story that we're telling. And what do you want your story to be? Do you want it to be a story with regret and boy, I wish I would have? Or is it a story of overcoming obstacles and doing great things that God wants you to do? Last week, we jumped into our third question. Is there any tension that deserves my attention? Now, that tension is when everything looks right, it feels right, but there's something inside of you that says, I don't know if this is actually right. That's a good time to just pause. Don't ignore that and take some time to think about that. Maybe it's not the right time for that decision or the right place, but maybe it's just your nerves. We don't know. But don't ignore it. So today, we're going to get into another question. What is the wise thing to do? What's the wise thing to do? Now, when I start thinking about wisdom, I immediately turn to wizards. I don't know why that happens, but I always think about they're old, they got the long gray beards. I've got a little gray going, but I got to work on my length, I think, to get to wizard status. But I always think of Splinter from the Ninja Turtles, if you guys are Ninja Turtle fans. But He was a dude turned into a rat that was their sensei. For some reason, he always had a little scraggly gray beard just because he was the wise one. They always had that little beard on him. But Wisdom can be defined as applying experience, knowledge, and good judgment as you think and act. So you're going to have your experiences, knowledge, stuff hopefully you know, and good judgment. We should have some good judgment as you think and act. Now, the purpose of asking this question isn't necessarily to stop us from doing something wrong. It's to stop us from doing something unwise. Because you can do things that are necessarily not wrong, but they may not also be wise. For example, you can root for Ohio State, and technically it may not be wrong, but it's just not wise. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Michigan fan, so, I usually got to take my dig when I have a chance to. But it's, you can do something not wrong and also be not wise. So that's what takes us to our big idea for the day. Now, our big idea, we actually borrowed because, Andy Stanley, a pastor and author, actually wrote the best question ever. So if he's already got the best question, we can't come up with anything better than that, right? So, and what he says, in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? So he's breaking down wisdom into three things. Your past experiences, so things you've done wrong, things you've done right. Hopefully we learn from those things and we can use them to guide our decision making. And sometimes that might be other people we've seen do things that maybe weren't so good and we don't want to copy. Or maybe we saw things that people did that worked well, and maybe, hey, we're going to use their experience to grow from that. Then you want to think about your current circumstances and how that affects your decision making. If you're strapped for money, maybe it's not the right time to buy the boat you've always wanted, right? Your circumstances might dictate the decisions that you need to make at that point in time. Then you also want to think about your future hopes and dreams. Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Where do you want your family to be? Are you making decisions now that actually help you get there? Or are you making decisions that are holding you back or making you take detours or left turns and right turns? Now, making wise decisions isn't always easy because life's a little bit messy, society is a little bit messy, and it's just a difficult process. So there's 4 false assumptions that we make about wise decisions that we need to avoid. We're going to work through some of those. And the first one of those is, if it's not wrong, it's all right. If it's not wrong, it's all right. So when people get married, there's a lot of changes that happen. You got 2 lifestyles, people grew up differently, kind of melding together into one household and trying to figure things out. And I'll never forget, I'm doing a load of laundry and I'm folding the towels and putting them up into the pantry. I was told I was not folding the towels the correct way. One of the first of many things I found out I did wrong, but that's okay. But I'm like, I folded the towel. It is in the pantry. There's nothing wrong with that. My better half like to describe, yes, there is something wrong with that. So I just folded them in half and half, put them in the pantry. Evidently, the correct way is you fold it in half and half, twice long ways, and then into thirds, and then it goes into the pantry. Okay, that is the correct way to fold a towel. So in case you're wondering, I don't know, but there maybe is a great debate on it. But is folding the towels and putting them away wrong? It's absolutely not wrong. But in her mind, I wasn't actually doing it the right way. And, that happens. But when we're using wrong or just avoiding what's not wrong to guide our decision making, it's going to be difficult because a lot of times what's wrong changes over time. I mean, if you look at different societies over time and even our own country, certain things stand true. Like murder is generally considered wrong in every society, all across the world, and all through time. I mean, almost everybody is against murder. Now, if you take something like spanking your kids, I'm not about to get into the debate about it, it's just an example. 50 years ago, you would say in this country, almost everybody would have said that's the right thing to do. Now, there's a lot more debate on that topic, and you'll find people that say it's the right thing to do. You'll find people say it's the wrong thing to do. And you'll find people everywhere in between on that spectrum. So when what is wrong is changing, it's hard to use that as a guide on what to do. In James 4:17, it says, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." If you know the right thing to do and you fail to do it, for you, that's a sin. So this just is way different than avoiding what's doing wrong. God's standard for us making a wise decision is to actually do what's right. And for doing what's right, what's wrong actually doesn't matter because you're so far away from it. When I was in college, I took a bunch of jobs working at different factories, and one summer I had a job at this distribution center. We took nuts and bolts and screws and fasteners. We took them from these huge cases. We broke them down into smaller packages that could be sold at the hardware store. We always had a quota to meet, which a lot of jobs have. So if you hit the baseline quota for each product, then you didn't get in trouble. But they also had bonus systems too, which was great. So if you hit the first bonus level, I got more money. Second bonus level, I got more money, which was fantastic. So I was competitive. I wanted money. I was like, I'm going to shoot for the higher bonuses and just knock those out of the park. But if I just did the bare minimum, there's nothing wrong with that. Correct? You're not going to get fired. You're not going to lose your job. The company will be happy. You're just doing the minimum. Most people at work have standards to meet, whether it's selling certain things or whether it's producing stuff or repackaging things like I was doing there. I work in the medical field now, and we have a lot of productivity standards, what they'll say, and it's time you spend that you can actually bill to insurance companies. And they want to track that and make sure the majority of the time of your work, you're actually getting money made for your employer. So if you're just doing the bare minimum of these, so if I'm doing the bare minimum of my productivity standard, there's nothing wrong with that. Everything's kosher, everybody's happy. Unfortunately, with work, God says we're working for him and not working for men. So your boss is not actually your boss. Well, actually, your boss is still your boss, but you're not working just for your boss. You're working for God. And God wants so much more for us. God wants the best out of us. So when it comes to our jobs, are we actually doing the right thing, and are we actually doing the best that we can do? Now, if the best is just scraping by and getting there, that's perfect. You're good. But if you can do more, if you can do better, then you're not doing what's right. And that's what God's looking for, is what is the right thing to do. Outside of work, look at your relationships. Look at your finances. You may not be doing something that's necessarily wrong, but is it the right thing to do? When I come home from work, is it okay to sit down and turn on the TV and watch something? There's nothing wrong with that at all. However, there are dishes to do, laundry to put up, kids to haul around, homework to help with. So maybe it's not the wise decision for me to sit down and watch TV when I get home. Maybe it's best for my marriage that I actually help out with some of those things and make a wise decision with that. So just because something's not wrong doesn't make it right, and it certainly doesn't make it wise. So the first assumption we want to avoid is that if it's not wrong, it's all right. The second one is if it's not illegal, it's permissible. If it's not illegal, it's permissible. Now, there's a million things that are legal, and they're probably not okay. Adultery is legal, right? So I bet your spouse would probably disagree that it is permissible, though. I wouldn't ask because you might get punched, and that's okay. But it's totally legal. They won't throw you in jail for it. Half the states in our country, you can actually still marry your cousin legally. I wouldn't recommend doing that either, but let's not go there. But laws change over time, right? I mean, just look at drug laws over the last, 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, at some point, it looks like they're probably going to legalize every drug over in the world. And I wouldn't recommend trying each one of those because bad things might happen. So if we can't keep the standard of legal and illegal as our standard, how do we go about knowing if something is permissible or not? In 1 Corinthians 10:23, It says, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. Go ahead and underline beneficial on that one. And I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. And go ahead and underline constructive there. So we have the right to do anything, but is it beneficial or is it constructive? Now, as Americans, we have many rights, and we like our rights. We have a First Amendment right, free speech. It allows us to do stuff like this on a Sunday morning and not have the government come crack down on us. It also gives me the right to go stand on the corner of a college campus and holler at all the students and call them sinners and that they're all going to hell. And I saw that happen when I was in college. So what are you going to do? Something beneficial and constructive, which is hopefully what we're doing this morning, or something that you have the right to do, something that's totally legal to do, but it's not beneficial or constructive. So again, God is drawing a big gap between what's legal and what's constructive and beneficial. So if we aren't concerned so much worrying about whether it's legal, but if it's actually going to help us reach our goals. And think of the big idea. Think about our past experiences, our circumstances, and our hopes and dreams. Is it beneficial and constructive to getting to those places? Or are we just doing it because, the law says it's okay, so that means it's fine? So we need to apply this principle to our marriage, with our kids, with our time, and not be so worried about whether it's legal. God set the standard so much higher for us that he wants us to do things that are beneficial and not just legal. So being illegal, or if it's not illegal, it's permissible. If it's not wrong, it's all right, are the first two things we're getting rid of. The third one is if it's not immoral, it's acceptable. If it's not immoral, it's acceptable. Immorality, again, is something that has changed over time in society. If you look at things when I was growing up that were deemed immoral at the time, some of these things now are not only seen as acceptable, but they're celebrated. And it's a wide range from when I grew up, or even when people older than me have probably seen a lot more changes too. But God set some morality standards for us, but there also seems to be maybe some gray areas in there where maybe, I'm technically not doing anything immoral, so am I okay? And we like to tiptoe that line of, we're right on the edge there, so I'm probably okay. And those of us that are Christians, we could tiptoe that line even with sin and say, is this sin? No, I think I'm okay. I'm right up next to it, but I think I'm fine. Well, in Ephesians 5, 1 through 4, it says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you, there must not even be a hint, not even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these things are improper for God's holy people. Should be obscenity, foolish talk, coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving or thankfulness to God. Not even a hint. Now, I've always been a fan of what you might call off-color humor, per se. And when I started hearing this verse in small groups and in messages in my Bible study time, it was a challenge for me to, look at what I was doing with myself and saying, okay, some of these things I need to get rid of. Because not only was there more than a hint of those, I was seeking enjoyment in some of these things, and God wanted more out of me than that. But if you take a look at this list, that could be challenging, because it could be a broad range of things that we could be struggling with, and God doesn't even want a hint of any of this stuff. So the question isn't necessarily, is it immoral or not? The question is there even a hint of anything immoral? And that's what makes that gray area completely disappear. If there's a question about it, then no. If there's a hint, then no. And that's tough. And that takes us back to our first question of the series of, are you being honest with yourself really? I mean, you really have to be honest with yourself and look and say, okay, am I doing something that prevents a hint of immorality in me, or, am I good? So if it's not immoral, it's acceptable. If it's not illegal, it's permissible. If it's not wrong, it's all right. These are things we're getting rid of, assumptions we're avoiding. The final one is if it's not over the line, it's fine. If it's not over the line, it's fine. Now, we all like to tiptoe this line, whether we like to admit it or not. But it starts even when you're a toddler. So those of you who have toddlers or have, got kids, you know this. When my daughter was little, she would like to play in the dog's water bowl. It was like a little pool. Splash, 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 splash. How much fun. So when she was tiny, it was just basically just saying no and moving her away. Well, she became a toddler, and then she started pushing her boundaries, and she would walk over to it and then turn and just look you square in the eye, and you'd be like, okay, child, no. You know better than that. Don't put your hand in that water bowl. And then she kind of smile at you all cute, and you're like, okay, just get away from the water bowl. And then she looking you dead in the eye still, splash, 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 right in that water bowl. And she would just wait to see what you would do. And it's like, oh my gosh, child, I'm going to kill you. So at that point, she crossed the line, and there became consequences. So she learned when she crossed that line, there were consequences. But boy, did she like to push that line. And she would still do it, even after consequences. She would just wait and see if we were watching or if we were paying attention or if we were actually going to get up off the couch and do something about it. And then as you get a little older, I don't know those of you that grew up with siblings ever did this, but usually bickering and fighting. Me and my brother did that all the time. We're only about 15 months apart, so we were either best friends or fighting. And at some point, my parents would get to the point of just keep your hands to yourself. And then, of course, what I would do, being the older brother, I'd get my finger right in my brother's face, and it'd be about 2 inches from him and be like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. So I was not crossing the line, right? I was not touching him. I was keeping my hands to myself. Somehow, though, my parents didn't find that acceptable, and I still don't understand why. I didn't cross the line. I was fine. But we tiptoe that line of, going over it. And eventually, if we tiptoe along that line too far, we are going to fall over that line, and it's not going to be good. Proverbs 5, 3, 7, and 8. Now, this is Solomon talking. He's like the wisest man that ever lived. He wrote most of the Proverbs. It says, for the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. Don't even go near the door. So if he's talking to his sons, trying to teach them how to stay out of trouble. Okay, there's this girl you know where she lives, and you're taking a path to go by. Okay, she's a little flirty with me at work, but, whatever. I'm just going to wander by, and she's out there, and her, what does it say? Her speech is smoother than oil, and she's dripping of honey. I mean, that sounds great, right? So she's out front, she's waving at you, and she's like, hey, do you want to come in and Netflix and chill? And I don't know if people still say that, do they? I don't know. I'm getting old. But you walk by and be like, no, I can't do that. I'm a married man, sorry, and you keep going. But then the next day you take the same path and the same path and the same path. How many times are you going to walk by and think about it before you finally give in and walk in? And be like, okay, we can watch some shows, but that's it. At some point, your willpower is going to be gone. And you've been tiptoeing across that line so long, you're going to give in, and that's going to be over for you. And once you give in, then there's consequences. Then there's hurt. There's relationships that are torn apart. What Solomon's saying here is don't even go near that door. You need to set a new line that's not the line. So if the line is adultery, you need to set your line so far away from that line you can't even see that line. when it comes to stuff like this, we've gleaned this from Pastor Dave, and I think other pastors have done this, where you're never alone with someone of the opposite gender. So that includes car rides, at restaurants and offices. If you're never physically alone with somebody of the opposite gender, you can't physically commit adultery. That's just a line you draw in the sand. So if you trip over that line, you're still not at the line where there's consequences. All right? This could be any part of your life, though. We need to set standards and lines that are far from the actual line that we like to tiptoe. I had a patient who grew up in an alcoholic's household, and his grandfather was an alcoholic. So he knew what life was like that, and he knew that he himself could become an alcoholic just because it ran in his family. So he decided he was never, ever going to drink alcohol because he did not want that for his life. He didn't want that for his family's life. He drew a line in the sand and said, no, I know what one drink could be too much. I don't even want to find out, so I'm just not going to do it. And he actually told his son when he became a teenager that if he ever touched it, he would kill him before the alcohol did. So I don't know how that worked out, but that's how serious he took it because he lived through it and he saw it. But a lot of us, we can have a drink. We can have 2 drinks. We can have 3 drinks. But how many times do you keep pushing that until now you're hooked on something, right? Or how many do you have to have when you come home to relax or to unwind for the evening? How many days in a row can you do that before you have to do it? And it doesn't have to be alcohol or drugs. I mean, this could be food. This could be video games. This could be social media. This could be anything. Shopping. I mean, you can be addicted to almost anything, right? If you tiptoe on that line, eventually you're going to fall over it. And once you fall over that line, it's too late. There's problems and there's consequences. You need to set that line further away so you don't trip over the actual line. Now, when Mike Pence was vice president, he was at some big state dinner thing. I don't remember what it was, but he was refusing to drink the champagne that they were bringing around on those little fancy trays and with hors d'oeuvres and stuff until his wife showed up, because him and his wife had this agreement in their marriage that they would not drink alcohol when there were people of the other gender present. So the media had a field day with this, making fun of him, like, oh, he can't control himself around women if he has a drink, or one drink is too many for him. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is actually fantastic. I really respected that decision. He's the vice president on the biggest stage, and he's saying my marriage relationship is more important than this state dinner, that I'm at. Now, I did see a pretty funny meme about it where he was at a table and there was a bottle of Aunt Jemima syrup on the table too. I think actually Aunt Jemima got canceled, didn't she? But anyways, Aunt Jemima's on the table and they were offering him a drink and he's like, oh, not till my wife gets here because Aunt Jemima's there. But I don't know, maybe that was that coarse humor that I shouldn't be talking about anymore. But I already screwed up. That's okay. But whether you like his politics or not, that's besides the question. They set a boundary in their marriage with alcohol and with people of the other gender around, and he stood by it on the biggest stage. Imagine how his wife felt. The media is making fun of him, but his wife, imagine how she felt. He's there on that biggest stage, and he's saying, hey, my wife and my marriage is more important than what's going on around me. Spouses, how would you feel about that if on the biggest stage, or even on the smallest stage, your spouse stood up for your marriage and said, we have a line that we're drawing, and I'm not crossing that line, because if I do, it's going to take me closer to the other line. And how do we do this with our finances? Do you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing financially until there's nothing left? Or do you leave a gap in there so you never fall over that line where you end up with nothing or you end up bankrupt? This can be any aspect of our life. So the decisions we make need to be so far from the line that even if you mess up, you're still going to be able to avoid regretting decisions. And so much for, he says, don't even go near the door. So set up some safeguards in your life. In all areas, you want to set up safeguards. Instead of tiptoeing on the line, create a new line that's so far away from the other one. So if we settle for simply avoiding what is wrong, doing only as little as we can before we get prosecuted, living for what society thinks is acceptable, and tiptoeing around that line, we're just setting ourselves up for regret. You're better than that. You deserve better than that, and your family deserves better than that. If we learn from our past experiences, we take into account our current circumstances and think about our future, we can certainly make more wise decisions. Let's focus on doing what's right, not just what's not wrong. Let's think about what's actually beneficial and constructive, not just, I think it's legal. Let's get rid of any hints of immorality, not, this gray area that's in between. And let's put up some safeguards in our lives so we don't get anywhere near crossing that line of regret and remorse. Will you pray with me? God, we want to thank you so much for today. God, we're just thankful that we have your word to help guide us through this life. It is a struggle every day to make the right decisions. And God, as we move forward this week, I hope you can help us make more wise decisions with our life and not just decisions that we think are okay. God, it's going to be difficult to think about what is the right thing to do, and it's going to be some tough decisions that we're going to have to make. And God, I pray that we can take a deep look into our own lives and decide, okay, not only is this immoral, but is there a hint of immorality in me? And God, that we could start pushing those things out of our lives and start moving towards what you want us to do and where you want us to be. God, I pray that as we look at the things that we do in our life, that we don't tiptoe around the line where there's consequences and the line where there's going to be hurt and regret. And God, that we can set up safeguards in our life to protect us from that line so we don't step over it and we don't cross it, and we can live a life free of regret and free of remorse. And God, I just pray that we can take all of our life experiences, thinking about our current circumstances, and God, where do you want us to be and where we want to be, and that we can make wise decisions. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.